The Russians did not interfere in the Romanian elections, or at least that's what has been revealed by this bombshell US report. So, why did they cancel them then? Let's look into it. This is interference. Hello there, and welcome back. We're here to talk about Romania. It's an interesting subject because there's a lot of alleged censorship going on, and there has been accusations of Russian interference, some kind of collusion, TikTok accounts. But some people say this was actually just made up because the EU wanted to get rid of one of the candidates who looked like he was going to win. Well, we're here with an investigative journalist. Her name is Iosefina Pascal, coming to us from Bucharest. Hi there, Iosefina.
Hello, and thank you for having me, Justin.
Thank
Hello to
you. Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you for your time. And we're here with my co host, who is Alex. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning.
Now, we're here to talk about this report. It's a US Judiciary Committee report that came out at the beginning of this month, and it looked at the allegations of Russian interference in the Romanian elections. We're going back to 2024, and the committee members subpoenaed documents from TikTok in particular, because this is where the alleged interference went on. And the conclusions were, this is TikTok, as quoted by the committee, there was no evidence of any coordinated network of 25,000 accounts associated with the account of Mr. Georgescu. Now, this was the chap who was about to win the presidential elections in Romania, but as a result of these allegations, the first round was cancelled, and eventually somebody else won. Well, Iosefina, you've been looking at this. What do you think of the report from the US committee?
First of all, it appears that Georgescu would have won by a landslide, according to last surveys before they actually canceled the second round of the elections. He was leading 72 to 28 against Elena Lasconi, which was his his opposition candidate. She's an important person in this discussion because she actually went on the record and said that, yeah, the elections were canceled without any basis and there were no Russians, which is interesting because she was the representative, the candidate of the progressive left. And obviously, at first, she supported canceling the elections, but later on said, yeah, there weren't any reasons to cancel the elections and we should have the second round run again. Never happened, as you know, unfortunately. First of all, we could have found out the information that the US congressman found out earlier on, like in March of 2025 in Brussels, actually, where the conservative groups, Patriots for Europe, the ECR, and other such groups, asked for a debate in the European Parliament precisely on the canceling of the elections in Romania based on the fact of the alleged Russian interference. So they basically asked for a debate. They asked for the European Commission to subpoena the TikTok representatives to present this alleged evidence in the European Parliament. And guess what? One of the leading EPP members, Siegfried Mureșan, who's a member of the European Parliament, blocked this, along with obviously Ursula's group, the EPP. I don't know why they blocked it, given the fact that they were running so many stories supporting this idea that Russians interfered, that TikTok didn't do anything to stop the Russians. So it was basically in their best interest to actually go forward in the European Parliament to prove to the whole of the EU and the world precisely that that was the case, but they refused that. They refused any kind of calls to parliamentary committees in Romania to, from the authorities that were supposed to stop the alleged Russian attacks on our democracy. None of the intelligence agency representatives wanted to discuss publicly. None of the electoral committee chiefs wanted to present any public reports. It was total secrecy. All we got was that decision from the Constitutional Court, which was based upon a report from the Supreme Council of Defense of Romania, which was also based on actually an intelligence report from France. This is absolutely mind-boggling. Our own intelligence agencies were quoting things that were already published by the intelligence agencies in Macron's government. So it wasn't even their own work. The allegations there were very thin. That's obviously why the U.S. committee, the Judiciary Committee, actually managed to get the right information out, because there was very thin evidence. And this is not something just the US Congress said, or Romanians and journalists and activists say, but it's also something the Venice Commission noted. They gave their own decision, which is obviously not mandatory, as you know. I mean, it doesn't have any legal effects. It's, let's say, optional if you follow or not the Venice Commission's decisions. But I will quote exactly what they said. They said that there are very thin evidence of the basis of annulling the elections. Basically, the report, they issued a report against the decision made by the Constitutional Court of Romania, which, by the way, was directly influenced by the French ambassador himself, before the second round of the elections in 2024, visited them and had private chats, which is completely illegal. We're talking about the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court of Romania, which is allegedly apolitical. It shouldn't, take sides. It should defend constitutional rights. And they were visited by the French ambassador in Romania, surprisingly discussing, guess what, limiting free speech for the next elections, because they already planned running elections again, because they weren't gonna, return to the second round that was supposed to happen in December. There were many visits like this. Even Georgescu's counter candidate, basically Elena Lasconi, met multiple times with the French ambassador in Romania, and also with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France. Okay, so basically,
Right. But
yeah.
tell me, Iosefina, given this report now and the counterclaims that the US congressmen are putting out, essentially suggesting that as you say, that EU forces, or perhaps even the French government, were meddling in Romanian politics. How have the Romanians, the people, reacted to this report? What do the Romanian people think today about that election in 2024?
Most of the Romanians feel confused, feel betrayed. I mean, generally, I'm speaking generally from a general point of view, because their vote was stolen, regardless of who you voted for, regardless of who you would be voting for. Their vote was stolen. The people who cast their vote in November are disappointed. So, again, even the far left, the progressives, are wondering, where is that solid evidence that our current president, Nicu Jordan, was promising? Everyone was waiting for that horrifying report of the Russians taking over democracy in Romania, because that's what he said. He was like, if I become president, as you know, he ran against George Simeon in May of 2025. And he was like, if you elect me, I'm going to publish everything. Everything is going to be public. You're going to see the truth that Russians were going to, destroy our country with Georgescu. We didn't see any report. Nobody saw any report. Nobody saw additional proof. So generally, the Romanians feel disappointed in what's happening on a national level. When it comes to the report itself from the U.S. committee, Judiciary Committee, Romanians feel sort of vindicated, in the sense that, look, a higher authority, who obviously has better intelligence gathering capacities, which obviously has a better chance of bringing TikTok representatives and obtaining documents from them, is actually saying we were right. We were not conspiracy theorists. We were not crazy people. We were not extremists and other such labels. But in the end, the facts stay the same. That's the issue. We still had canceled elections. We still have a president that's not only failing at his job, but he's seen as illegitimate for good reason. And in this situation we're in, there needs to be accountability for what has happened. We have constitutional court members colluding with politicians, being involved in corruption scandals, being investigated, and being funded by the EU, Soros, and previously USAID. So this is where we're at. Justice, the judicial system in Romania, the highest court of the judicial system in Romania, has been compromised. So basically, our trust in the judicial system, in someone defending our constitutional right to vote, most of all, has been crushed. This report is a good step forward, but it does not solve the effects and the cause, essentially, of what happened in Romania.
Right, Alex, these are pretty serious accusations, aren't they? We're talking about an attempt, a successful attempt to circumvent the democratic process in Romania. That's what this report amounts to. And Alex, I want to quote one of the Brussels Signal's favorite characters from the past, this European Commissioner, Thierry Breton. Do you remember him? Because
the Information Commissioner, of course I know him.
And the man behind the Digital Services Act, which is what I call censorship legislation. Unsurprisingly, they don't call it censorship legislation here in Brussels. But anyway, I think they call it free speech legislation, actually, or something like that. Anyway, he said, Commissioner Breton said, we did it in Romania, and we will obviously have to do it, if necessary, in Germany. This is his direct quote. We will include the clip.
Et faisons appliquer nos lois en Europe lorsque celles-ci risquent d'être circonvenues et qu'elles peuvent, et si on ne les applique pas, conduire effectivement à des interférences. On l'a fait en Roumanie, il faudra évidemment le faire si c'est nécessaire en Allemagne.
He was implying that, yes, we did intervene, this we being the European Union, European Commission, we did intervene in Romania, and we'll do it again, basically. Democracy be damned. This is where we're at, Alex.
Yeah, colour me surprised, Justin. This isn't the first time. Those of us who have been campaigning against the European Union for quite some time have seen this happen over and over again. If you remember, when the French were first given a referendum on deepening ties with the European Union, getting the euro, they didn't vote in favour of it. Oh, they had to do it again. When Ireland didn't vote for the Lisbon Treaty, those elections were deemed not plausible. They had to vote again. Why is Marine Le Pen potentially not going to be able to stand as president? Because the Europeans say that she was defrauding the system. This happens over and over again. Of course, Brexit was one because Putin decided it. The Russians were involved in all of that. They decided to use some sort of strange scapegoat of it being Cambridge Analytica as well, when they didn't even work on the Brexit campaign. The EU are brazen about this, quite frankly. They say, oh, yes, we will do it again to stop this level of election interference. But actually, the plot thickens when, if you go deeper into the evidence from TikTok given to the House Judiciary Committee GOP, it actually says that there were active bots promoting Georgescu. They weren't from Russia. They were from another Romanian political party. So I wonder how deep this conspiracy goes. I wonder whether the EU was saying, right, okay, we need to harvest a load of bots, we need to push Georgescu, so then later we can turn around and go, oh, look, he was so popular on TikTok, that must have been the Kremlin. But, you know, I always find it amazing when so many people still to this day think that the EU is some big, benign, benevolent force. Despite the constant anti-democratic things that it does, it actively went into Cyprus and took people out of money's bank accounts during the Eurozone crisis. It removed democratically elected leaders during the Eurozone crisis. You know, it's got a very deep and rich track record in interfering in democracy, in cancelling democracy, in ignoring democracy. As somebody who sat in the European Parliament, I constantly say to people, it's not a parliament. It doesn't propose legislation. It doesn't amend legislation. If it doesn't vote in the way the European Commission wants it to, the vote is just done again and again and again and again until it goes the way the European Commission wants. We were supposed to have the Spitzenkandidaten process to pick the next Commission president when I was in the European Parliament, and it was stitched up behind closed doors. But Ursula von der Leyen was just anointed because she was their choice decision, because she was the one who was going to toe the line. The whole thing going on over in Brussels, folks, is a big, corrupt, anti-democratic cartel. It has been for decades, but they've been very good at duping people into thinking quite the opposite. And you know what? It's very difficult to do that in this day and age of social media. And it's becoming increasingly ever more difficult to do it under the watchful eye of the American Trump administration.
Now, Iosefina, I do know one or two Romanian journalists here in Brussels, and I actually asked them when this was going on, what do you think? And the answer was they actually agreed that what was happening was not democratic. And if I understood, we have one Romanian on the team of commentators here, and he said that it was commonly accepted among journalists working for Romanian media that there was no evidence of Russian collusion, Russian backing for this man Georgescu. Is that the case? Is it commonly accepted in media circles that there is no evidence or was no evidence?
I think you're lucky you have good people on your team, and you've known the good Romanian journalists, because most of the journalists here were absolute paid shills. These people are funded directly by the government, unfortunately, and this is a huge issue with freedom of speech in Romania and freedom of information, basically, because if you don't get the right information out, people are going to be misinformed, and we're not going to fight disinformation. Guess what? These people were paid by the government, and they were actively supporting not only canceling the elections, banning Georgescu and sending him to prison. This was that period up until May, when Nicușor was finally he wasn't elected, in my opinion, he was just put there in place of Georgescu and Simeon. Up until that point, when everything cooled down, they were actively campaigning, political campaigning, against Georgescu and Simeon, asking for prison time, asking for a ban on AUR, just like in Germany, against AfD, and so on and so forth. They were actively promoting the Brussels narrative, the French narrative, and they were saying it themselves. It's not us who's saying that. It's not us saying Russia did it. Look at France. France is saying that. Anthony Blinken is supporting this decision. It's normal. We're in NATO. We're in the EU. We need to stop Russia. That was their talking point. Obviously, in private, like when I was discussing with my colleagues at the time, I was telling them, look, this is BS. This is not real. We have no proof of this. Can you understand that? It doesn't matter. We need to do this. Do you want the Russians to take over? Russians are not going to take over anything. And a funny thing, this needs to be mentioned. Our former president, Klaus Iohannis, was actually at the Council of Europe. There was some summit meeting at that point around late December. And one journalist who was actually brave enough asked him, look, we have evidence against Russia. Why don't you call the Russian ambassador and maybe even Sergei Lavrov, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia, call them to an investigation? Why are we not investigating the Russians, right? Because the Russians are interfering. And Klaus Iohannis said on record in front of all those journalists, we would call them if we had proof. So basically our own president said, yeah, we're not investigating the Russians because we don't have proof, but that report was used to cancel the elections. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I have become ashamed. So when you asked me before the show, am I a journalist? Am I an activist? I'd rather say I'm an activist rather than say I'm a journalist, because that would mean I'm working in the same field of activity as many of my colleagues who have actively supported a lie that thwarted democracy in Romania. This is truly horrifying, but that's the issue, I think, in many countries, especially the US. We have literal government mouthpieces that were supporting the Biden administration openly, campaigning against Trump, pushing the Russia Gate and the Russia collusion narrative, which turned out to be a huge fake, and a fake that cost a lot of, progress in the US at that point, and destroyed the credibility of, again, intelligence agencies, because we keep going back to what's the source of these alleged reports. It's the intelligence agencies. It was the same in the US. It was the same here. And worst of all, in Romania, it was also the foreign intelligence agencies that actually came to Romania during the elections and met with policymakers. We have no idea what they discussed, but Pavel Durov, the owner of Telegram, told us that he was visited by the head of the Foreign Intelligence Agency of France in order to suppress free speech and support for Simeon ahead of the May 2025 elections. So we kind of get an idea of what was being discussed behind closed doors. And this is obviously interference at the highest level, like Alex explained very well.
Now, Iosefina, what about this chap, Georgescu, then? I know we're going back a couple of years. If I understand correctly, he has since retired from politics. But the other message I was given when I asked Romanian journalists here in Brussels was that he's some kind of new age hippie type, and that they weren't very happy with the idea of him becoming president because he didn't seem very presidential. I mean, he had some unusual ideas, let's say. What kind of character was he, and how come he had all this support in the first round?
Well, funnily enough, I think Georgescu was actually a visionary. He was like the oracle of Romania. Why? Because actually, things that have been happening in the past months, he was talking about them years ago. So he was a visionary. He was talking about toppling Maduro's regime because it's basically a narco state, and that there will be some let's say, activity going on in Venezuela, because Venezuela is a key player on the geopolitical map. Guess what? That happened. And he was saying this years ago. He was talking about how water and energy are going to become basically currencies of trade because they're so important, especially water. Nobody believed him. I mean, journalists in Romania, people were making fun of him. This guy's crazy. He's talking about water becoming a currency. Well, guess what? We have EU directives that are basically limiting the consumption of water, the consumption of energy, obviously based on bogus climate hoax hysteria stuff. But still, it is being limited and thus becomes a currency. Romania has the biggest hydrographic basin in the EU, which is, again, very important. When he was talking about such stuff, even when he was in the UN, he was running an agency that was operating under the UN. He was talking about how corrupt the people at the UN are, how they're dealing with pedophiles. And guess what? I mean, the Epstein files not only confirmed those horrifying things, but it went even over that. We see heads of state, we see heads of intelligence agencies, we see activists, journalists, CEOs involved in this huge scandal. I mean, it's not even a scandal, it's basically the great reset that the World Economic Forum was talking about is happening as we speak, but it's not happening on their terms. So in my opinion, Georgescu was a visionary. I did not vote for him in 2024 in November. I didn't think he would have the chance to win. And you know why? Precisely because he had this type of discourse. And I kind of underestimated the Romanian public. I said the Romanian public is not ready for this. I mean, they literally voted people that support Ursula and so on and so forth. I mean, they're not going to vote for someone like this, maybe in like a decade's time, but they did. And when it comes to what Alex said about the Liberal Party in Romania supporting a campaign that was running allegedly in favor of Georgescu on TikTok, yeah, they were thinking the same thing. That's where things went haywire for them, because they were thinking Georgescu has no chance to win. But he's a good puppet candidate that we can, play around with the polls with and move some, because come on, we know besides election interference in Romania, at least, and the US especially, there's an issue with electoral fraud. And they were thinking maybe if we move like 4% from here to there to someone who doesn't matter, yeah, it's going to be good. We need to support this guy on TikTok, crash that guy's visibility on Facebook and so on. So they were playing games like political games on Georgescu's behalf, which worked against their own will, because he was already topping millions, tens of millions of views, and he literally, again, polled around 70% for the second round. So that Liberal Party campaign was actually useless, but it should be investigated because they were actively manipulating the public opinion, right? And they were accusing Georgescu later on of doing that with no proof. There is no proof that Georgescu paid $1 in order to get promoted or to get campaign funds or influence from other people.
Now, Alex, I was talking to someone here on the team yesterday, and she said to me the phrase that she used was "the walls are closing in," which is quite a dramatic way to put it. But we have seen raids on the offices of X in France. We have now, as we have reported, there are moves in 6 or 7 EU countries to limit access to social media, some under the guise, this is what some people say, under the guise of protecting children. Now, I am unclear where I stand on this, because I think protecting children online is very important. On the other hand, these people say, look, if you have to log in with some kind of ID verification from now on, this will be another step towards the totalitarian regime, right? I mean, my question to you is, are we inevitably going down this dystopian track towards some kind of brave new world?
Yeah, I mean, look, the EU are very good at manufacturing a crisis or using a crisis to deepen their influence, and they're using the Digital Services Act to do just that. The mask rather slipped in the United Kingdom when it was suggested that the government should close down X because purportedly people have been making abusive images of children on Grok, the AI tool that is owned by X, and that people have been sort of generating naked photographs or putting bikinis on people. There became a sort of ridiculous trend in the United Kingdom all of a sudden. You can imagine what we all did. We went onto Grok and said, make me a picture of Keir Starmer in a bikini. And amazingly, it wasn't very good at it. But also, this idea is the perfect ruse, isn't it? Oh, look over here. If you don't close this down, you're supporting the worst possible crime, paedophilia. You can use multiple tools to make indecent imagery. People have been doing it on Photoshop, right, for decades. And so Grok said, right, we're going to look into this, we're going to rectify it. But what the powers that we were pushing to do was close down X, right? They said, oh, well, this is happening on Grok, so we're going to have to censor X. That doesn't even make sense. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like saying there's a problem with my Apple AirBuds, so let's never sell another iPhone. They're different tools. But the EU are determined to close down X. It is the thorn in their side. I have a feeling that there is going to be a renewed passion to do this. If they were serious about protecting children online, if they were really serious about this, the very first thing they would do would be to go after the big pornography sites, which could easily just be banned, okay? A lot of countries, you go to the Middle East, you go to lots of countries around the world, and they ban online pornography. Now, some of these websites are doing the most heinous of crimes. They're not moderating their content. At one point, when Visa was taken to court in America based upon things that were put on Pornhub and were monetized, Visa asked Pornhub to do an audit. 88% of the content had to be taken down because the provenance was unknown. It was showing paedophilia. It was showing abuse and rape. And so that sort of suggests where the focus should be lying if the EU were serious about this. But they're not. What they are doing is using this perfect structure, this perfect construct, saying, oh, paedophilia, 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 close down X, close down the speech element of it. I haven't seen them go after Snapchat. Okay, I never really hear Snapchat mentioned in all of these things. Why? Because Snapchat doesn't influence election outcomes. It's not the sort of public forum, but it's used a lot for old men to groom little girls and little boys. So, those of us who've observed the EU for a long period of time know how they work. But unfortunately, like Iosefina was saying, too many people in the media just parrot their lines, just sort of repeat their ridiculous propaganda, this sort of fake setups of, well, it must be Putin, he's come to do this, therefore we have to now do that. What? He's a bit busy. That war's not going well for him over in Ukraine. I don't think he's about to come and start bombing the east coast of Britain. Just putting it out there. And if he were going to, why do we only have 8 days worth of ammunition? It's just, all of it doesn't make sense. But there are now, because of things like X, which they want to shut down, there's increasingly a conversation about the European Union, about its machinations now. And people looking back historically go, wow, actually, in retrospect, it does seem something funny went on there, which is why they're so desperate to close down free speech. And, the sad thing is, guys, they'll succeed. Because the EU are brilliant, like I said, of manufacturing a crisis. They're tenacious, they're audacious, they're brazen, they don't care. and they get away with it, and so they will continue to do it.
And I do concur with what you said about the expectation that X will be shut down. I've been hearing just that from senior politicians here in Brussels. Iosefina, the last word with you. Let's go back to Romania and free speech. Does Romania have a tradition of free speech, and where will this go from here? What's next?
Romanians, after the revolution in 1989, they were hoping to get free speech because we were living for like more than 4 decades under communist regimes, under different forms of communist regimes, and we did not have freedom of speech. I mean, you could make jokes in your own home, but you couldn't go out in the public and speak your mind, which is something most of the West does not understand because they have not underwent that type of tyranny. But now, like Alex said, they will experience just that. That's the issue. In Romania, unfortunately, I think there was a huge experiment that will be exported onto other EU countries, starting with censorship on digital platforms and obviously ending with canceling or redoing elections until we get the right person. Now, when it comes to freedom of speech online, we have multiple laws against it. And we even have our own Ofcom, let's say, let's make a parallel between that. We have our own Ofcom, which actually can close down TV stations, fine them into oblivion. And now, since the Digital Services Act went into effect, they can close down social media accounts of people and fine content creators with huge amounts of money online. Now, again, this issue was pressed upon and promoted as such because of this alleged Russian interference. We even had the vice president of our communications regulatory agency who came on record in the parliament and said we need to ban TikTok altogether because they cannot control the narrative on TikTok, because there's a lot of young people. So going back to what was discussed earlier, allegedly protecting children, there's a lot of young people in Romania that promote national values, conservative values, and are generally questioning the government's decisions on TikTok. TikTok is huge in Romania. So their intention mainly here is to block underage access to TikTok using the idea that it's a bad influence for kids. And it is. It's true. There are a lot of bad TikTok trends that gain attention and put kids into dangerous situations. But we know from their own laws, we know from their own practice that they can block content like that from reaching children, but they don't. They're using this idea that they get so much bad content, we need to ban it altogether. We need to impose ID verification and the digital identity to everyone to protect children. It's insane. Romania has a drug epidemic. We see 10-year-old drug traffickers and nobody is batting an eyelash. We don't see the Constanța port being seized, being raided every day to see where the drugs are coming from. But we see a ban on social media, and we see a limitation and forceful digital verification of every user there. The legislation that was passed in Romania that was basically promoted as anti-hate speech against every type of category of people. You cannot criticize the government because it's hate speech, because you're basically an anarchist. You cannot criticize certain governments of certain countries because you're going to become an anti-Semite. You cannot criticize the migrants that are overflowing the EU countries because you're a xenophobe. You cannot criticize the far left government here because then you're going to be a fascist, a neo-Nazi, and so on. So they've covered everything in Romania, and people should learn from what's happening in Romania in order to not let this happen in your countries. But I'm also a bit skeptical when it comes to EU directives. They will be implemented because there's no one and nothing to counter it. The European Parliament is basically a notary that takes account of what's happening and cannot do anything about it. I mean, yeah, okay, the EU Commission wants this, we're just going to pass it. Imagine that Thierry Breton did not even write this horrifying Digital Services Act directive. It was actually promoted by an NGO, and this is what created the shadow government, as I call it, of NGOs that enforce the thought police onto people in the EU. The NGO is called Avaz, and it was actually running a petition to arrest Călin Georgescu in Romania, and it runs all kinds of social and politically charged initiatives online, and they're the ones that wrote this bill, this directive, whatever you want to call it, for Thierry Breton, and he just presented it to Ursula, and that's how we got the European Fact Checkers Network, and that's how we got censorship being actually implemented online.
Well, that's the message from Iosefina in Romania. It's coming to a country near you, basically. That's all we've got time for. Thanks, Iosefina. Thanks, Alex. And thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.